This is Politricking
On record, Tshidi.
with Tshidi Madia on EWN.
Hello, welcome to Politricking with myself, Tshidi Madia. Yes, the voice is not great, but you know what? It doesn't matter. The point is, I've heard you loud and clear. I am back. So we're going to try have interesting conversations, at least try, right? Have conversations with our newsmakers, people in the political landscape, try to understand what is happening in our ever-shifting movement, in our ever-shifting world of politics. I'm very excited about the guest this week because he's somebody I've kind of been keeping an eye on. I think he's an interesting figure. Some of you might only pay attention to him because of the GNU. Some of us who cover politics have been paying attention to him in KZN. I'm joined in studio by Dean Macpherson for the second episode of season 6 of a politics podcast brought to you by Eyewitness News. Dean, hi, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad that I eventually got invited after 6 seasons, but rather late than never.
At least you cracked an invite at some
least.
point, right? We've actually never had a proper sit down, you and I. Not like this.
Yeah, I think we sort of meet at political rallies or events, and we have chats there, and we have discussions. So it's good to be in studio. I think the last time I was here actually was before the election last year.
Yeah, who would have thunk it? Yes, when you were lobbying, you were mobilizing, you were campaigning, really.
Yeah.
Was ahead of the big rally you had in KZN.
Correct.
And then, oh yes, now I remember.
And then I was here doing like a media tour through
Yes.
Gauteng. And we should probably go back and listen to that and what was said then and what
But look
came
at
to
that. Look at that
pass
picture
now.
though, right?
Yeah.
Because there was no indication when we met and we sat, because you met with all the editors at EWN, that will be where we are now when we had that meeting, that media tour. When you look back and you reflect on where you are right now and the past and the GNU, of course, what goes through your head? What comes to mind when you reflect on the journey thus far?
So at that point, Tshidi, you'll recall that we were sort of briefing and focusing on the government of provincial unity, and that was my sole focus. And I was hoping to become an MEC, and the party had really tasked me to go out, run that campaign in KZN, and we had a great candidate in Chris, and my sole focus was a coalition government in KwaZulu-Natal. We achieved that, but I didn't think it was going to. I wasn't thinking nationally, to be honest, because that's not where my focus was. I wanted to stay in KZN. I wanted to go to the legislature, and it obviously turned out, partly true and partly quite different to what my expectations were. And I think sort of 8 or 10 months now, I think we are into this government. And it's gone so quickly, and so much has happened, and I think there's still so much more that's going to happen, that it's quite overwhelming at times, to be honest. And I just wish I'd get a few more hours in the day to contemplate some of that, and see what it means for the future.
The question that continues, and I keep getting asked this as a journalist all the time: does the GNU survive or not? Will it make it to 5 years or not? The fact that there's a question that never goes away. What does that tell you, I suppose, about how fragile the GNU is in the eyes of the public? And I don't know if the public is accurate in that reading of whether or not this is a coalition that actually is vulnerable.
So, I mean, I think that question's going to last until the 2029. If the GNU was to stay in place. I think that context matters, and in South Africa, we had a constitutional obligation to form a government in 14 days. When you look at Belgium, which took 7 months to form a government, they were able to deal with all of those policy issues before they actually signed on the dotted line. So in some way, we are trying to deal with the policy issues after the formation of government, which is not ideal. And so when the public see the tensions, the public fights, if you will, those are a result of the architecture that we were forced to work within. I'm convinced that if we had had more time to be able to deal with some of those issues, they wouldn't be playing out now. But that's, those are the cards that we were dealt with. That's what we've had to do. So as we go along, we have to work these things out. Alan Winde said something really interesting to me a couple of weeks ago. He said, every month that the government holds together, it makes it harder to break up. And I find that I've thought long and hard about that, because the longer it continues, the more entrenched it becomes in society. And that's why actually in KZN we work so hard to get the GPU in, because when you had MK that was trying to delegitimize the elections and trying to make a claim for government, I said to everyone that we've got to legitimize this government and we've got to institutionalize it as quickly as possible so that the electorate get used to it and it starts to become normal. And I think in some sense that as time goes by, that's what may happen with the GNU. There's always going to be disagreements. That's the nature of not having a coalition agreement. And maybe there should have been a more structured coalition agreement. Maybe that's something that should still take place. I would be in favor of a more formalized coalition agreement above and beyond the statement of intent, so that there is an agreed policy position between the parties on issues like budgets and legislation going forward.
At some point, I'll obviously speak about your particular portfolio, but let's stick with GNU. And now that you've spoken about the formation of GNU, let's go there a little bit. I look back at that period, and I also recognize it was a very tight window that a agreement had to be cobbled up together. But it felt very much that the DA started worrying about what it wanted in terms of what government needed to look like versus what it didn't want post the election of a president. It helped to seal the election of a president. In hindsight, do you not think that there was a tactical error on the DA's part, that actually the demands that you make, even today, the issues that come up, the dissatisfaction with Bela, expropriation, that these should have actually been part of the initial conversation before you helped the ANC secure presidency?
I think that, when you look back now, we would have liked more time. And time was not in our corner. So we had to do the best with what we had, and we had to, try and deal with the top line issues. And, everything can't become a top line issue, or else you're going to make no progress. So I think the party said, here are some principles that we need to deal with. This is what it's going to take to secure our support of the president. I think in hindsight, some of those things maybe should have been brought in, like legislation, the size of cabinet, that sort of thing like that. But, I think that we live and we learn. And what I am convinced of in 2029, there will be another coalition government. And I think that when we approach that, we will obviously have learned some lessons. But, time was not on our side. We didn't have the time to agree to a full suite of policies that we would agree on. Obviously, we've tried to do that to an extent through the medium-term development plan, which by and large is pretty good. And, there's a lot of policy coherence between the various parties there. But, no one had given us a book also on national coalitions. They're very different to municipal and provincial coalitions. And so we were trying to do we were trying to do this for the first time in 30 years. And could we have done better? Probably. Did we do well? I think so. But it'll definitely, we've learned some lessons that we'll take forward.
I did feel the DA was blindsided, outmaneuvered throughout that period. And I think what's given rise to the current impasse over the budget is also testament to all of that, where it's taken multiple decisions that have been taken on by government, and the DA feeling completely left out for it to fire the salvo it did with regards to budget, where we saw in February, we just didn't have a budget proposal put on the table, and one has happened now in March, and we actually don't know what will happen with it going forward because that impasse still sticks.
I think one of the things we may be guilty of is we trusted other political parties, that they would enter into some of these discussions in good faith, and some of them turned out not to be true. Or that the entire faith wasn't operationalized. So, we expected the cabinet to be the size that it was. We didn't expect, 2 deputy ministers to be added in, or we didn't expect, the budget just to be sort of thrown at us in the way that it was, or that our concerns or views wouldn't be taken as seriously as they was. So I think as we approach things now, we're a lot more cautious and guarded in the way in which we have to do this. And that's because the trust deficit, unfortunately, exists and seems to be widening. And it's up to the political leaders and the officials in both those parties. And this is why I say I think something that needs to be put on the table is a coalition agreement that actually deals with that trust deficit, that there is not an ability to ambush each other, that we deal with things in a more structured way than they currently are. Because, just sort of, doing it in the way that it is not working, I think. And if the idea or the sort of thought is just to try and see, if we can, bumble along until the next election, I'm not sure that that's going to work. And I think there's too much at stake for the country, for people to, as the ANC would term it, to use it as a tactical retreat. It's not a tactical retreat. It's, you must treat it as a government and not as a, holding position in your party. We certainly are treating it as an issue of governance, not as an issue of, tactical retreating or, trying to satisfy internal factions. And until we get to that point, we're going to continue to see this churn internally, I think.
I can't move on without going back to the point that you made, that you trusted other parties. You've been in politics for far too long as an organization to be that naive.
I don't think it's naivety, Tshidi. Helen has spoken at length about that sort of thing. So, that's on record. I think that we've learned from that. And that's why, we're not prepared just to take people's words on things. We want signed and sealed documents now. We want dates agreed to. We're not going to just accept that ports are going to be, concessionalized or passenger rails going to be devolved. Those things have been spoken about for 8 years, and not once have they ever been kept to. So we want dates. We want time frames. We want written agreements, and that's how we have to proceed going forward.
Could the budget potentially be, I keep saying this, and I think Alpha and I had disagreements about it before, I keep saying that the budget, could it be the straw that breaks the GNU camel's back? I keep asking that question, more so because you are correct to say that the DA wants particular things. You've sent a list to the ANC. I mean, I've seen the issues around the Labour Relations Act, wanting the World Bank here, the ports as you spoke about now, railway as well, the rail network as well. Is this a point of no return? And I ask this now with what you said was pointed out before by the Western Cape Premier Alan Windley, that the longer it lasts, the tougher it is to try and walk away. So you've pulled a salvo. You've actually been quite clear about where you stand and what you're unhappy about. What happens now? Because I think that's a question that the general public has, is what will bring the DA back maybe? Or is it simply, if these demands are not met, this is it?
So I think the one thing that you don't do is negotiate in public. And so, the DA is not going to negotiate this budget in public. Whatever leaking has not come from the DA, because we've been very clear to the ANC that we're going to do so in a responsible manner. I think that it's been irresponsible, the briefing that's taking place, and it keeps happening in the Sunday Times, interestingly enough, around other political parties that some parties want to speak to. It's either grants or tax, and that is not the way to approach it. So what we are saying is, yes, we do have a list of demands, but those demands are linked directly to economic growth and jobs. And we've been very clear that unless this government drives economic growth and jobs, then we're not entirely sure what the point of it is. And we've said that to the electorate, we've said that to our members, that is the condition for us staying in the government. And so we have to see that, and we have to get concessions on that. We've got to get agreement on that. And to me, it would seem that strange that if another political party didn't believe in actually putting times and dates and agreed frameworks on some of these important things, which everyone says they agreed to, but they never ever seem to fulfill. So we're not going to negotiate through the public. I think that what it's going to do is that if there are other partners or other people that they try to bring in to support the budget that doesn't have our support, well, then it becomes very difficult to us to implement an ANC and EFF budget, if that was the ultimate thinking. And I think that the party would have to seriously consider what that looked like and what that meant, excuse me, for us, because those two together and those policies are the very antithesis of growth and jobs. So we're going to allow the negotiators to deal with it and to talk about it.
If the NC goes behind or around the DA to pass a budget the DA doesn't approve of, it makes no sense for the DA to remain in that government and to serve it. I don't even think it needs the organization to rule on it. I think it's common sense that if they pass a budget you are not in agreement with, how do you, as the Minister of Public Works, deliver on that? How do you then see that budget through when you didn't agree with it?
I think, of course, it would be incredibly difficult, but those aren't my decisions to make. We're not like, the EFF where I can just come here and pronounce, for the entire party. We have structures in the party. We will make those inputs to those structures, and a decision will be taken. But I think we shouldn't get ahead of putting the cart before the horse. I think there's a lot of runway that still has to be traveled down. And I'm confident if you had to say, what are you going to put your money on? I'm going to put my money on a budget that is negotiated between our parties, that is rooted in growth and jobs, because I think everyone understands what's at stake. And look, ANC people phone me all the time and say, please, man, we've got to find a deal. We couldn't possibly think of working with the EFF because, the EFF is going to, do to the ANC nationally what the EFF have done to the ANC in Gauteng and Johannesburg. So, there's a lot of responsible ANC leaders as well that don't want to see that take place.
Yeah, there are many schools of thought that are currently at play in the ANC. I just want to very quickly say to you, nobody I know of in the EFF, minus its leader, will come out and state any position without going back to the party. I think let's be fair to them. Let's speak about the contradictions in the GNU. We often see them playing themselves out on social media, a back and forth between ministers. From time to time, you've got the spokesperson of the president entering the fray. And then you sit there and you're like, we knew that this would not be smooth sailing, but it also just doesn't look good. The clumsiness of managing disagreements as well doesn't necessarily inspire confidence.
I think that I don't disagree with your assessment. I think that there's got to be a better way of managing disagreements. In fact, I was having a discussion with a very senior ANC official on the way here and saying that I think part of the problem is the lack of discussions that take place between the DA and the ANC. And I said, I think it's crucial that the Secretary General of the ANC and the Chairperson of the Federal Executive meet regularly. That's what would happen in a normal government. That the leaders of the parties would meet regularly, and I really do implore and hope that that's going to take place, because I think that would smooth out a lot of things. Because when there's no direction, maybe it becomes a bit of a free for all, and everyone believes that they can say and do what they want, and the public then look quite rightly at the government and say, these guys aren't serious. They talk past each other. They can't talk to each other. And so I think we've got to get better at that, as well as trying to deal with the myriad of other things that we're trying to get better at the same time.
One last contradiction before I move to your department that I want you to maybe speak to. The foreign policy thing, the foreign policy issue. When I looked at the DA's trip to the US, I said to myself, if they've met anyone of consequence, the pictures would have been there. If they met a Marco Rubio, for instance, the Secretary of State, we would have seen the images. So I questioned who the DA actually met, number one. Secondly, I questioned the motive behind the trip. If all of us, when the Trump administration started reacting to disinformation about expropriation, and we all pretty much moved in one direction initially, Why is it that it feels that the DA is moving in a different direction? So I asked myself the question. I looked at the statement from Emma Powell, and at some point she said something about transformation. And I kept asking myself, what would be the intention behind that? In my own wisdom, me and myself and I, concluded that it was about the Afrikaner voter base, making sure that they don't see or feel left out. You've got AfriForum spreading disinformation over there, and the response to AfriForum is they can go to the US. But the DA is seemingly positioning itself as the party that wants to say, we are fighting for you to remain here with the elections in mind. But it's something that happens outside of the government that you serve alongside. So it's outside of GNU. It is an anti-transformation message that you went to the US with. Those kind of contradictions. And then now you've got Helen Zille saying, we'll come up with our own foreign policy. We will have our own views. We are friends with Israel. We will do that inconsistency. We've already flagged that it's a problem. And one would imagine that once you know who, you should stop digging. But when the response is, well, we will do our own thing too, that doesn't help the situation though.
So if we had wanted to compete with AfriForum, we would have provided daily updates from Washington, which we didn't. I think that we're still a political party, the DA, and the DA has partners in Washington that the ANC don't. Let's be honest about that. And we went there to go and explain to them, to say, actually, do you know that this is a government of national unity? Do you know how many people, congressmen, senators, didn't even know that? They actually think that there is still just the ANC. When you start to actually...
Even though you were all collectively together at the UN General Assembly preaching Kumbaya and GNU last year.
It's still astonishing how many people in Washington don't know that there is a coalition government in South Africa. And so we went there to go and explain what is going on in the government, what our role is in the government, and that we ultimately don't want to lose a goer. That is something that we are determined to do. Now, I can't think of anything that would be more anti-transformation than losing a goer, because that would affect tens of thousands of black farm workers and black people that work in the agricultural sector. So the DA is absolutely committed to working to ensure that South Africa is able to remain in a goer, to be able to explain to policy makers. We didn't meet with Marco Rubio because that would be wrong if the DA was meeting, with President Trump or secretaries or anything like that.
The secretaries.
Yeah. So we didn't do that. We met with policy makers, think tanks, senators, Congress people that were on.
You couldn't do it with your GNU partners in hand to show that you.
Well, they still haven't gone yet.
But you couldn't suggest when you were going.
No, we have suggested.
Did you say to the ANC, let's go together?
Well, we have said to the government that we should try and get there as soon as possible, and that hasn't happened yet. So the DA still must play a role of being able to say to other political parties, to other politicians, that these are our views and this is what's going on. And that's what we did. And that is absolutely right. Just as the ANC, and I found a statement, when the ANC welcomed officials and politicians from China, and the words that they used were to build diplomatic relations in December of last year. Now, I've never heard of a political party that builds diplomatic relations. So on the one hand, the ANC are able to meet with China, Iran, whoever they like, but when the DA goes and does it, then it's a problem. And the ANC must pick which battle it wants to fight. But it cannot single-handedly tell the DA how to behave and then do exactly the same thing. And so the DA, we have foreign policy positions. We have those positions which we will continue to articulate and make. But what the ANC can't do, and the ANC was very critical of the DA in the negotiations, of saying that we cannot run sealed mandates on ministries. We said that's fine. But yet the ANC continue to run foreign affairs as if it's a sealed mandate and no one else's view can be taken into account or matter. And so again, you must choose which one you want. So we will continue to be robust, articulate what our foreign policy positions are. where we think South Africa should go and what we should be doing, and how we should be trying to navigate what is a very tricky international scene at the moment.
I think
And
that's
I'm
fair.
not sure at CD right now that the government's been succeeding at that in any particular
With the US
success at the moment,
specifically or
particularly
across
with
the
the
board.
US. And the US can't be treated as our enemy. They are not. They are a partner to us. And I think that what the city of Johannesburg did last week with Santon Drive, and the ANC were very clear. If you go and look at
Renaming
Nomvula
it to Lena
Mokonyani's,
Khalid.
what
Yeah.
her motivation was to rename Santon Drive was so that the Americans can see it on the letterhead every day. Why would you go and provoke people like that? And so, the ANC's foreign policy position seems to be very, robust and muscular and in a very, provocative manner. We're saying that we actually need to be more conciliatory. We need to pull together. We need to have something that actually can achieve the objectives that are important for South Africa, which is investment and jobs and growth.
I'll take a point that you make there about foreign policy. You and your deputy minister, Sitho Zikalala, the spats find they find their way into the public domain quite often. When you're both appearing before committees, those who sit and observe can't help but see the tensions, the issue of expropriation, the what's going wrong supposedly in the Western Cape versus elsewhere. Those issues, those differences, from where I stand, haven't necessarily been well managed. I don't even know if it's possible to manage them better. Your sense of what needs to happen. I mean, it was the DA's chief whip. I think George, what's his last name?
Megalakis.
Like saying Sitla must get over, Sitla Zagala must get over it. At the time he said it's been 6 months already. Yes, it sucks to lose your job to somebody else and somebody with lesser qualifications, I suppose. But get over it. But even that suggested that those tensions remain a big part of what goes sour, what goes wrong in trying to have a cohesive ministry functioning.
It's difficult, Siri, and in some respect, I have sympathy for him because, I understand that he's a senior member of the ANC. He, used to be the premier of a province. He was unceremoniously removed from that by Duma. He then, was taken out of the province, made minister. But at the end of the day, I didn't make those decisions. Those were the decisions that his party made and the president made, and we have to live with those. That I am less qualified than him should not be of any consequence because the reality are there are other ministers that don't have degrees or, having a qualification is not a proxy for success. If that was the case, then South Africa would be at a very different place, but it's not. And so my approach has been right at the very beginning to say I understand it's difficult. I will do everything that I can to make it easier, and I genuinely have and continue to try to. But I'm also not going to be held accountable and responsible for the actions of other people, what they determine or what they want to say in public. I'm not his boss. It doesn't work like that in government. A minister is not a deputy minister's boss. I cannot tell him what to do or what to say or what not to say. And so I have taken the approach to say I've still got to lead this department at the end of the day. I want to be diplomatic. I want to rather deal with things in a cordial manner or behind closed doors. If other people don't want to do that, that's obviously, for them to decide. But I've got to get on with the job at the end of the day. And I'm not going to be drawn into skirmishes back and forth because it's draining, it's unnecessary. I've got to set the example for my officials in how to perform their job.
What did you find when you got to Public Works? I know you were busy at some point with the EPWP program. I know that there was the IDT contracts that you're concerned about in terms of what you expected versus what you have discovered or continue to uncover on the job.
I mean, what I wanted to do with Public Works is I understand it's been, a sore point for government for a very long time. I mean, it was the enabler for Nkandla. It was the department that famously, defended fire pools and all that sort of nonsense. It's also been, responsible for very questionable tenders and projects that have been undertaken, from Telkom Towers, R1 billion spent and nothing to show there. And so I understand that there is a deep layer of rot that exists in the department, but I also know that I've come to know that there are good, competent, skilled individuals that, when given the opportunity, have really started to excel, and to show that they've got some big and great ideas. I've also taken a lot of counsel from Patricia DeLaw, and she really started some good work there. She really pointed me in some direction as well, and she was the first person to flag the IDT issues with me. And so what I've had to do is do two things at once. I'm trying to deal with the problems, and there are some really structural problems that exist within the department. We have major financial problems as well, but at the same time trying to gear it towards the future to become what we term as an asset management entity, that we own all of these buildings, all of this land valued at hundreds of billions of rands, but it's not generating any income or annuity for the state. And so ultimately what I'd like to do is turn the department into two things. One, into like a growth point type of business where these assets are used to generate income and to be sold and to be bought and to actually run a property trading entity in government, and entirely possible to do that. And then on the second hand, or the second point, is to make it an infrastructure delivery unit through Infrastructure South Africa. So we've done a lot of work with them as well. So it's very consuming. It's very difficult. But, we have some really good officials. And I've said to everyone, this is the opportunity to bring big ideas. I don't have a monopoly on all the ideas. If you've got a big idea, I want you to be able to put it on the table. And so now I say to the guys, we're becoming an ideas bank. We've got ideas that are coming up, how to do this, how to do that. And that's been exciting to see. And so public work still has a lot of problems, and it's going to have a lot of problems for a long time. But I think the turnaround is there. And I think that the perception amongst the public is starting to slowly turn, that it's not the butt of jokes, but it actually can be an economic delivery unit for South Africa.
All the priorities that you, in your mind, have for public works, is there any concern that none of them will be fulfilled, or that you'll be able to meet those obligations before your time there runs out? Do you actually see some of those priorities in your lifespan, be it 5 years, be it 2 more months of GNU, with the current, because we don't actually understand the climate that we're in, and every day it tests us. Are you worried about not being able to do what you wanted, what the vision was for public works?
I think if I adopted that approach, I'd get nothing done. So I have to plan for the 5 years, and that's what my 5-year plan is for the department. We've put some very bold ambitions into the medium-term development plan, which runs until 2029. We're already starting to see some of those changes. And so I think you have to break it up into short, medium, and long term. So some of the stuff, let's say I'm not the minister in 5 years' time, some of that stuff will only be realizable after then, but some of the stuff will be realizable now and in the medium term. So if you look at what we're doing on property assets, we've already released 31 properties for expressions of interest, which are collectively valued at 1.4 billion rand. We're putting that into the market at zero cost, and that will generate 10 billion rand worth of investment, and generate 40,000 jobs just in the construction sector, and 100,000 jobs just in the service-related industries. And that's just 31 properties, Tshidi. We have 88,000. Imagine what we could do when we roll all of that out. We're taking an ambitious program to our small harbors, and we'll be soon releasing proposals for Hout Bay Harbor, which we think could generate between 1 billion and 1.5 billion US dollars worth of private sector investment and generate tens of thousands of jobs for the community of Hangburg and surround. And so all of just, that's, sort of pen to paper kind of thing. And that's really exciting. We've also instituted what we call a special projects unit now, which is going to be filled with some of the best and brightest minds, engineers, planners, and that is going to, we're developing a pipeline of either stalled projects or projects we want to get off of the ground, and they're going to be responsible for rapid implementation of that. And then if you look at the reforms we've done in Infrastructure South Africa, that really excites me. We've got a bold ambition to attract 100 billion rand worth of new investment in 5 years. We implemented what we call the project preparation window. We put 180 million rand where we are actually going to pay. We're going to pay to do the planning for you on your project so that it's bankable, feasible, totally oversubscribed. And then the most critical part of what we're doing there is the reforms on infrastructure and local government, because that's where the crisis exists. And so we've got a project in 4 municipalities where we are actually going to literally be their delivery unit on infrastructure so that we can show all other municipalities, particularly metros, that if you work with us, we can deliver for you. And that's what we've just done in 9 months. Imagine what we can do in 5 years. So I'm hugely excited, and I really pray that I get the full term, because South Africa will look very different once we finished with it. And it's going to look very different for people that have been marginalized and left out and want to be able to find a job in construction, in development, and we're going to be able to make communities look a lot better than what they are already.
What is your sense of the buy-in that other municipalities and provinces have with you there in terms of what partnering could mean as far as infrastructure projects in provinces and municipalities are concerned?
So good question. And I think that, what I also have said, Tshidi, is I need to show, so a lot of what we're doing is new. And I want to show other provinces that our proof of concept and how it works. So, it was just easier to show that proof in KZN because there's an alignment between the national government and provincial government, and because I come from eThekwini, so I have really good relationships. And the mayors and ANC, we're not involved in that coalition government. In fact, I actually turned down being involved in that. But I wanted to show that when you work together in the partnerships, what we can achieve, and we are taking that proof of concept to the rest of the country. In fact, I had a discussion with the Premier of Gauteng last week and said to him, listen, let's bring this proof of concept here to Gauteng. He's on board. We're busy arranging that. I have great relationships in places like Limpopo and the Eastern Cape. I've been doing some fabulous work with the Eastern Cape and Limpopo as well. So, obviously just some of the bigger announcements have been in the Western Cape and KZN because it's easier to show proof of concept, but that's going to start transcending itself into other provinces. But, the reality is that you can only work with people that want to work with you. So it's taken a bit of time to break through in Gauteng, but I think that we're making progress there now. And I'm looking forward to working with the Premier and the Mayor here because, as the President has said, if Gauteng fails, South Africa fails.
With regards to the Bella Act, it is easy to see what the holdup will be because of the issue of regulations. As far as expropriation is concerned, you're the implementing agent, from my understanding. Yes, the DA, your political party, is taking this matter to court. However, one imagines that you serve at the behest of this government, the president, and you have a responsibility to get into your expropriation. What is the holdup? And I do note that you had a legal opinion that said otherwise, that you'd given to the president. But what do you do now? Have you started? How are you navigating that?
If we want to expand ports, rail, harbours, etc., that requires land to be expropriated, often government land, ironically, to be able to implement those projects. The same is for the national transmission network. We've got to build 14,500 kilometres worth of new transmission, and you have to create servitudes to do so. The only way to create a servitude is to expropriate it. Now, unfortunately, expropriation has been weaponized to the point that it is seen as, and it's been weaponized by both the left and right, by the way, to be seen as a terrible thing. And in the wrong hands and in the wrong context, it could be. But I'm only interested in making sure that it is done for a way that is able to achieve our economic goals. Now, my job as minister is to ensure that that takes place. So, when there are court cases that are coming, my job is to apply my mind in a sober manner as to how to approach that. And that's exactly what I will do and will continue to do. The implementation of the Act will also be done in a sober, rational way that is devoid of party politics and looks to see how do we affect my views on efficient and effective acts that is not allowed to be used for party political processes or to be allowed to make it about something that it's not, that we are able to use the Expropriation Act to drive our economy. And that is the only thing that I am preoccupied with. And if anyone wants to make it about something else, well, that's their responsibility. But I'm not going to be drawn into those fights or discussions.
The view that it can maybe assist with abandoned buildings, hijacked buildings in Joburg, are you on board?
Absolutely. And let me just say, Tshidi, I've made this point, and I've had a few of my own colleagues who disagree with me on this. If you own a building and it is contributing to the decay of a city centre, it is overrun, it is a threat to human health and safety, and the owner of that building long left the country and is living somewhere else, why would the state say, well, we'll give you R1 million for that? That just seems odd. And this is the point that goes to my concern around the sequencing and how that takes
the issue
place.
Of no compensation, yeah.
That you've got to make sure that the term just and equitable is given effect. So in some places, nil may be just and equitable, but the court must decide that, not a politician. And that's where the problem comes in.
And that's where the back and forth is. So,
and because if you allow politicians to decide that, you are setting yourself up for failure. But Leah, I was actually just meeting with an NGO before we came here. Expropriation is not a silver bullet to abandon buildings in the city of Johannesburg.
Yeah.
Because let's say they're expropriated and they come under my control. Well, then I'm still going to have to go to court to evict people from there. What do you then do from them? Then I'm going to have to get demolition orders, etc., etc. So the concept of even expropriated, abandoned buildings or invaded buildings in the city of Johannesburg is not a silver bullet. It's a potential solution, but it's not going to stop what's going on there. We've got to think of the full runway of solutions to deal with abandoned buildings in the city of Johannesburg.
All right, I'm trying to wind down. There's so much, actually. I cannot.
Well, maybe I'll make it for season 7.
We never know. It depends on how this one does. We can't leave without discussing the DA. The dilemma that I think the DA had when GNU was formulated that you pretty much had to take the cream of the organization and put them up to government because they must compete. The impact of that on the party, what has been your sense? Because I hear differing views all the time. There are people who are concerned that some of the best in the party are now government focused, because you must also admit the workload that you're dealing with, I'm sure makes your head spin.
Well, I mean, just as an example, I'm also the provincial chair of the party in KZN. So every Monday is a party day for me in KZN. And then every Saturday as well as a campaign day for me in KZN as well. So it's very, very difficult. I don't think that the party was as prepared as we could have been to go into government. I mean, I certainly didn't have any training to be in government. I had to quickly learn. And I think that we've got to be more prepared in the future. I think obviously we have had to, pull people into positions. But, I mean, Helen was the leader and mayor and premier. And so, we have to adapt and we have to, get better. I think as we move now into local government, we're going to face the same problem of how do we pull people into being mayors and speakers and MMCs, and being able to make sure that you've got capacitated caucuses at the same time. It's hugely, hugely tricky. And I do take the point that I think that we're going to have to think long and hard about how we do that for this election and the next one coming up.
Are you surprised that there are people in the DA who view those of you who are serving in cabinet as suddenly the elite members of the organization, who think that, I mean, some have said to me they believe that the GNU ministers, representatives of the party, will put their personal interests first because you do have perks. I mean, I laughed a little bit because before you came in, somebody wanted to do a run through. And I laughed and I was like, the only person I've ever experienced that with, believe it or not, is actually the head of state. It's President Cyril Ramaphosa. I don't experience that with anybody. And I'm like, so you have these staffing components, you have so much that's dedicated to making you to helping you work on a day-to-day basis. There's some people who are your peers in the party space who think that you make decisions now with your personal interest in mind because of the perks, the blue lights, the this and the that. Your response to that and the potential of such thoughts, yeah, the potential of such thinking, and the impact it could have on your organization.
We're a political party. That's always going to happen. And so, I think that we as ministers and deputy ministers have been very, very cognizant to make sure that we remain very in touch with the party. And I continuously say to my colleagues, make sure you're in your constituencies, make sure you're available for by-elections, make sure that you're at caucus. My office knows that, and I sometimes get very annoyed with them when they try and book things on a Thursday because, you got to stay in touch with the party. But there will, we only had 12 positions. You're not going to be able to satisfy everyone on that. But I think that what we have shown is that the DA's interests always come first for us. Every, decision outside of a legal decision, what we do, how do we implement the DA's manifesto, how do we campaign to drive the DA's share of the vote up, how do we, make ourselves available to DA councillors and so on. And so we've had to do that. But, just to go back to the point, I'm really glad that someone from our office did come here before because I'm a professional, Tshidi, and I want to make sure that everything that we do in government, particularly in my department, is the very best because I serve the people of this country and I serve my party, and everything that we do, we must do it to an excellent standard. And so all that we do in public works and infrastructure is thought out. We want to do it to a high standard, and we want to show the public that actually that we're upping our game in terms of governance, in terms of professional outward focus, so that there's credibility to what we do. So I'm actually glad that that they came to do that.
The opposition within the organization to the GNU, I imagine, still exists. Just like those parties that are in the GNU, there's still some resistance. I imagine it still exists in the DA. Are you concerned that that voice becomes louder? Are you concerned about the impact of that on somebody like John Steenhuisen? He is possibly, I'm not actually sure yet, up for re-election next year.
So, obviously you've always got to manage expectations in your own party, particularly when you're in a coalition. As someone said, if you want to get 100% of your way, go and win 51% of the vote. We didn't do that. So we're not going to get 100% of our way. And I think that it's also an adjustment for the DA to moderate its expectations, that we can't achieve things to the speed that we do in the Western Cape or the city of Cape Town, as maybe some would expect in national government or the provincial government in KwaZulu-Natal. And I spend a lot of my time managing expectations in KZN as well. You're a very difficult place. But I think that as long as we keep, communicating with the party, keep being held accountable to the party. But let me say that the supermajority of the party is behind the GNU. That is a fact of life. And the internal meetings that I've been in, the supermajority is very much behind John and the work that he's doing. And there's definitely no, inclination that that's going to change. And the one thing about John, let me tell you, He's the first person to say that if he believes that we have run out of road to effect our primary mission, which is around growth and jobs, he will be the first person to lead us out of the door. So he will lead by example. There's no one that has, sort of things to say, well, my personal ambitions are more important than the party. We serve at the behest of the party. And that's why I famously said the only person who's going to tell me to resign out of government will be the leader of this party. And when he does, I will do that.
It's always a tricky one.
And when the party tells me it's time to go, I will have my letter ready. But I'm going to continue to serve the party, continue to serve the public until otherwise.
Is John still the ideal person to take the DA forward?
I think what John has done, no other leader in the history of the DA has done, which is take us in international government. And that is something that he will always be, I think, remembered and thanked for. I think that he leads us in a very difficult space. John is never afraid to tell other political parties what the DA's views are. He's always ready to stand up for what the positions of the party are. But he's also able to, navigate the difficulties of coalition politics. He's able to treat the president and others with respect. I think he has respect from others in the ANC and other political parties. And so that takes a very special kind of politician to be able to sail those seas. It's not easy. And if it was easy, others would do it. But John has done a good job, and I think he continues to do a good job.
I just want to very quickly say, I must add my 5 cents. I can't help it.
Sure.
I think what the GNU happened to him, I'll give him credit for. He obviously was a partner in the negotiation, but he wasn't alone. It's not a performance of the DA that helped. It's the ANC's fumblings that have actually designed whatever is happening in our country. I always look to the ANC to go, but you are the reason why all these things are happening. It is your losses, your failures, anyway, but I take what you're saying about...
But I just have to say, Tshidi, in 2019, this party was on its knees. Our leader walked out in a very public fashion. The chairperson of the party resigned in a very public fashion.
I was there.
You were there. I mean, for some bizarre reason, we draped a black cloth over it was like, like it was a funeral.
I actually went on social media and
I remember it.
I took that picture to show it was a DA.
And the party was in a crisis. And when very few people wanted to put their hands up, John did. And we could have gone one or two ways. We could have continued with that decline and ended up like many other political parties. Or John chose to fight back, and he chose to fight for the party. And he decided to rescue this party from a potential collapse. And so the DA is not just in this GNU because of what happened to the ANC. It's because John spent 5 years preparing it to be ready for a moment like this. And I think that John really deserves the credit for that. And the problem with politics is no one thanks you when you're alive. They only thank you when you die. And they write, and that's when they go and they say nice things at funerals and beautiful clothes.
You're passing.
But people will remember John for
this chapter.
For this chapter, absolutely. I'm convinced of that.
I'll take that. I do want to wrap the metros. Ekuleni's been saying for a while that it actually does want to work with the DA. They're still with the EFF. You've got the EFF working with the ANC and Action SA in Tshwane and in Johannesburg. What are your thoughts about what needs to happen? There is a very small runway until local government elections. Does the DA have the appetite to still continue to try and get into governance? Is that a thing, or do you focus now solely on elections? Already that process, from my understanding, is well underway on the DA side.
It's a good question. And I think if you ask the DA will always say what's in the best interests of residents or the country. And my gut feel would be that if there was an opportunity to land on that runway now, the DA would take that. But it would come with terms and conditions. And what happened in Tshwane would have to be reversed. That would be the parties on record as saying that the ANC have to go and fix what's happened in Tshwane. And if you go and look what's happening there, it's. I mean, I was speaking with Celia's this weekend. It's a shame to see some of the
What's
stuff that's
happening in
being
Tshwane?
what's being reversed
People are
there.
celebrating so much.
Well,
about what they're saying.
you see
But
money
it's
is being
obviously we're seeing
spent
social
rather on
media.
water tankers than actually providing water, spending money on security contracts.
You said not providing water. The
rather,
taps are now flowing in Hammanskraal to a degree.
well,
I mean, let's
because
also
of
have
the
an
work
honest
that
assessment
actually
of some
was
work.
taking place. The DA actually got that
Now,
water
Tshidi Madia was a
treated back.
part of that. She was the deputy mayor.
Well, you know what? It was funny that she wants to take credit for that now, but she doesn't want to actually say that who was leading that at that time.
Let me tell you what's funny. NC ministers also look at the DA as you celebrate dealing with the backlog at Home Affairs, as you celebrate what you do in your department. Every one of the celebrations you have, guess what NC ministers or former ministers are saying? That it was our work. When something happens at Home Affairs, I'm very certain Aaron Mutwalidi has views because he also did the groundwork. So fair is fair, right?
Well, if you look at Home Affairs and you go and look at what Leon listed, a lot of that happened after Aaron Motsoaledi. So
There's a really beautiful article by Africa as a Country. I want you to go look at that.
you can send
And
it to me. I'll
about the
read it.
clearing of the backlog that actually really wasn't.
But
I'll let
but
you
for
go read
us,
that.
if we want to, if there's a desire to fix what's happening in Gauteng in local governments, Tshwane has to be sorted out first, and we have to restore Celia's back to the mayor. That's what the party said. It's and so that for us is non-negotiable. But I think that Johannesburg can be sorted out. I think that Ekurhuleni can be sorted out, but there's got to be a determination for both the DA and the ANC to come together, work together, and hopefully we'll learn from what's happened in the GNU, and we'll come up with a coalition agreement for those municipalities.
I can't let you go without asking you this last question. The level of scrutiny that I imagine you experience now has to be so different from when you were in KZN, right? There's AI, whatnot around you, but also one of the first things that came out immediately was somebody had found, I think, a Tinder profile of yours. So now suddenly, it's almost like there is no the rules of engagement are very different. Your privacy is also not respected, and then you're violated even with this AI stuff that's been happening. Managing that and finding your way and feeling your way through that.
It's been really difficult. I'll be honest with you. I actually, after those AI voice notes came down, I was in tears because it just became too much for me. Because the one thing about me, Tshidi, I'm honest to a fault. And, I always want to do the right thing. And when someone is going around accusing you of corruption and, making derogatory comments about black South Africans, that just got too much for me, to be honest. And, it's a tough price you pay to do the right thing. And, even in my relationship, I have a long-term relationship. And, when that Tinder profile came up, I had to phone him, and I said, listen, I just need you to know this has come out, and it was hurtful for him. Obviously it was 2 years before we got together, but having to live your life in that way is really difficult. But I'm really lucky that I've got good friends, I've got good family around me, I've got a good support staff around me, and so you just have to take the bad with the good, I guess. And I try and read. I don't try and read the Star because they're obsessed with writing front page stories about me. I think I sold more copies of the Star newspaper than anyone else does. Every second.
Keeping every newspaper in business, every radio station. I'm all about all of us.
It's always breaking news. Minister Macpherson being sued, or Minister Macpherson caught stealing, or Minister Macpherson caught with corruption. It's garbage. So, you just got to, just also be able to switch off. And so, at the end of the day, I also make time to switch off, go for walks, be with my dog, be with my partner, be with my family. And that's what gets me through it at the end of the day.
I'm going to leave it on that note. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Minister
Thanks for having me.
Macpherson in studio, sharing his thoughts on, of course, the GNU, right? And where we are politically and what possibly happens next. And, of course, speaking about his portfolio of public works. Thank you.